At the tail end of December, I sat at my cluttered desk under fluorescent lights that hummed like distant memories. The year had been a whirlwind of late nights, project crises, and endless meetings, each demanding my full attention. My inbox pinged with yet another message from Human Resources announcing the distribution of year-end bonuses. Anticipation and dread swirled in my chest. I glanced at the empty cubicle across from mine where Christine, my closest colleague, should have been wrapping up her spreadsheets. Instead, her chair was pushed back neatly, her computer monitor dark and cold. A knot formed in my stomach. I had known she was unwell, but seeing her absence laid bare a truth I had tried to ignore. I remembered how she always offered to help others, often staying late to untangle data errors for junior analysts. Over the months, she had become my confidant, a presence amid a sea of corporate demands. Late one evening, as I hurried out of the office, I bumped into Christine in the corridor. She leaned against the wall, her face pale but resolute in quiet resignation. "I'm sorry I disappeared," she whispered, voice trembling. I stopped, concern flashing through me, and asked, "What was wrong?" She lifted her chin, eyes glistening, and said, "I don't want special treatment. Don't expect recognition for covering shifts or handling my workload." She gave me instructions on client priorities and deadlines before limping away toward the elevator. At that moment, I realized how determined she was to shield her team from the reality of her condition. Her words echoed in my mind as I watched her retreat. The next morning, I found a note from our manager requesting an update on key reports. I understood then why Christine insisted on managing expectations she refused to let her illness overshadow her reputation. On Monday morning, I received a call from her sister. She spoke softly, words stumbling as she explained that Christine had been admitted to the hospital after a fainting episode. The weight of her voice pressed against me like an anchor. I rushed through the streets, breaths shallow, while every pedestrian blurred into the cityscape. Arriving at the hospital, I learned Christine was in a private room down the West Ward. When I entered, I froze at the sight of machines with lights and tubes trailing from her arm. A nurse stood vigil, adjusting monitors with practiced care. Her name tag proudly read Nurse Sarah Dawson. She glanced up at me, offering a sympathetic nod before ensuring I washed my hands and donned a gown. As I approached a bed, Christine's hand twitched. I squeezed it, and her eyes fluttered open, pooling with gratitude and sorrow. Felt tears well up. I spent the next hour sitting by her bedside, listening as Nurse Dawson explained Christine's condition in steady, clinical tones. Stage 2 lymphoma. Treatment would be aggressive chemotherapy, transfusions, potentially radiation. Every word felt like a blow, and I fought the urge to fall to my knees. Christine reached for my hand and whispered, "Don't expect recognition. I need you to focus on yourself right now." Her eyes held a mixture of defiance and fear I'd never seen before. I promised to visit daily and left with a lump in my throat. On the elevator ride down, I stared at my reflection in the mirrored doors. My face was pale, my heart racing. Back at my apartment that evening, I stared at the email detailing my bonus. The numbers glowed on the screen, a sum I had only dared to imagine when I accepted this job years ago. Excitement should have buoyed me, but instead, I felt hollow. Every dollar seemed tainted by Christine's hospital bills, the fear in her sister's voice, and the memory of her warning not to make a fuss. I stared at the digits, then at my phone. I could send her something, help cover treatment expenses, pay her utility bills, maybe even secure a private nurse when hospital shifts changed. The thought of giving away every cent of my bonus grew more compelling with each passing minute. The next morning, I withdrew the full amount from my account and wrote it out on a check, my signature bold at the bottom. I drove to Mercy General, the envelope burning in my coat pocket. In the lobby, I found Nurse Dawson by the reception desk, logging notes into a computer. She looked up, surprise flickering across her tired eyes when I presented the envelope. "This is for Christine," I said. "Please use it for whatever she needs most." Her hands shook as she took it, and she glanced around before whispering, "You don't have to do this." I shook my head. She warned me not to expect recognition, but I can do nothing. For a moment, the sterile lights of the hospital seemed to dim. She folded the check carefully, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, and for the first time since Christine's diagnosis, I felt a glimmer of hope. As I left the hospital, my mind buzzed with a strange mix of relief and apprehension. I had given everything I'd earned, and yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that Christine was hiding something deeper. There was a promise in her eyes when I handed over that check, a secret she wasn't ready to share. I drove home through the gray winter morning, my heart heavy with anticipation of what might come next. I woke before sunrise the morning after handing over my entire bonus. The city outside my window was cloaked in a pale light, and I felt as if I were suspended between relief and dread. Coffee in hand, I replayed the events of the previous day. The weight of the envelope in Nurse Dawson's hands had felt unexpectedly monumental, as though I'd tossed a lifeline into a churning sea. I wondered how Christine was faring now that money would no longer be the immediate obstacle. Despite the cold air swirling around me, a warmth rose in my chest, mingling with the ache of uncertainty. By mid-morning, I drove back to Mercy General. The drive felt different today. Every red light and passing pedestrian seemed laden with untold stories. When I arrived, I found Nurse Dawson in the hallway just beyond the nurse's station. She offered a discreet nod and ushered me toward the private room where Christine lay. The sterile corridor gave way to soft lamplight and the rhythmic beeping of machines. Christine's eyelids flickered as I stepped inside. Her skin was paler than yesterday, but her eyes held a spark. I pulled a chair close to the bed and reached for her hand without speaking. Christine's voice was fragile as she murmured, "Thank you for yesterday." She attempted a weak smile. I squeezed her hand and told her that she deserved every bit of help we could muster. She winced slightly as she shifted in bed and then closed her eyes. Nurse Dawson hovered by the monitor, adjusting and for drip. I watched her work with careful precision and felt a surge of gratitude for her quiet competence. I realized in that moment that Christine's survival depended on more than medication. It depended on the kindness we could muster in a world that often overlooked the vulnerable. While Nurse Dawson updated us on Christine's vitals, I noticed a file resting on the bedside table, its cover marked Insurance Review. Christine's brow furrowed as the nurse explained that the insurance company had approved only a portion of the treatment. My chest tightened. Part of me had believed that my bonus would smooth every obstacle, but now I saw that red tape could slice through even the most generous lifeline. Christine turned her gaze toward me, eyes filled with both pride and apology. I forced a reassuring smile and promised to handle whatever came next, though inside I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Later that afternoon, I met Christine's sister Emily in the hospital lobby. She was clutching her phone, scrolling through emails with a tense expression. When I approached, she looked up with tired eyes. We moved to a corner table at the cafeteria. I handed over the remainder of my savings, the little nest egg I'd kept for emergencies. Emily's face collapsed with gratitude and disbelief. "You're giving everything you have," she whispered. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "She warned me not to expect recognition," I said quietly. "But I can't let her face this alone." Emily reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That evening, I returned to the hospital with printed appeals for insurance coverage. Armed with a stack of documents and determined resolve, I confronted the hospital's billing department. The clerk looked at me as though I were an unwelcome guest. I explained Christine's condition and the urgency of full treatment. I laid out the check I'd already given and the evidence of the denied claims. For a long moment, she studied my paperwork without speaking. Then she shuffled her feet and said she would review the case but could make no promises. I left with my heart pounding, unsure whether bureaucracy would swallow Christine's chance at life. On my way home, I replayed memories of Christine's laughter echoing through the office and her unwavering support during my own stressful projects. How had I taken her for granted? I resolved to do more than throw money at the problem. I would become her advocate, her voice in the halls of administration. The city lights blurred around me as I drove, each passing car a testament to lives unfolding unseen. I wondered if any stranger would step up for me in my hour of need and felt a wave of both hope and fear at the thought. The next morning, I returned to the ward with fresh paperwork and a folder of patient rights. Nurse Dawson met me in the hallway, her expression weary but unwavering. She escorted me inside Christine's room. Christine was awake, her gaze following me as I approached. In a voice that trembled with both strength and exhaustion, Christine asked, "What's happening?" I placed a folder on her blanket and explained my plan to appeal the insurance denial directly to the state health board. Her eyes widened with concern. "Don't make waves on my account," she murmured. But I pressed on, determined to fight for every treatment protocol she needed. Late that afternoon, Nurse Dawson appeared at the door again, holding an unexpected document. "They've scheduled a review hearing next week," she said quietly. "If we present this appeal in person, they might reconsider." Relief washed over me, mingled with new anxiety. The hearing would decide whether Christine received the full regimen of chemotherapy. Without it, her prognosis dimmed sharply. I looked at Christine, her features drawn but resolute, and felt a surge of fierce protectiveness. I nodded gravely, ready to stand before any board or bureaucrat to ensure she got her life back. As I left the room, the autumn light streaming through the window painted Christine's silhouette in gold. I realized how little time I had to prepare, how many obstacles still lay before us, and how much was at stake. The next week would test my resolve and reveal the true measure of my commitment. I walked down the corridor, each step echoing in the quiet wing. The machines beeped steadily behind me, a reminder that time was both ally and enemy. I clutched a folder of appeals to my chest, my heart pounding with determination. The battle for Christine's life was just beginning. I woke before dawn on the day of the appeal hearing, my heart pounding so fiercely it jolted me upright in bed. The street lamps outside my window cast long shadows across my sheets, as if the city itself were holding its breath. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to steady the racing thoughts in my mind. Today would decide whether Christine received the full course of chemotherapy she desperately needed. I dressed in a crisp shirt and tie, something respectable, professional, hoping that appearances would lend weight to the words I was about to speak. My reflection in the mirror looked tired but determined. On the drive to the State Health Board's offices, I clutched a leather-bound portfolio containing dozens of pages, Christine's medical reports, letters from her oncologist, notes on her performance at work, and testimonials from colleagues. Every statistic, every signature, felt like a weapon I intended to wield against an indifferent system. The city's morning traffic crawled, mirroring the slow progress of our efforts against bureaucracy. I rehearsed my opening statement out loud, voice trembling until I forced onto a steady cadence. "My name is David Parker," I said under my breath, "and I am here to fight for the life of my friend, Christine Morales." When I arrived at the austere building, flanked by stone columns and tinted windows, anxiety almost overwhelmed me. The receptionist directed me to a small waiting room, where I sat on a stiff plastic chair and reviewed my notes one last time. Beside me, another appellant, a middle-aged man appealing for coverage of a rare disease, flipped through his own documents in silence. Our eyes met briefly, and I offered a nod of solidarity. He nodded back, weary but resolute. The door to the hearing room stood ajar, voices muffled within. I drew a deep breath, clutched my folder, and stepped inside. The hearing room was colder than I expected, its walls lined with dark wood panels and lit by harsh fluorescent lights. 3 members of the review board sat behind a raised bench, their expressions impassive. A clerk announced my name, and I advanced to the podium, portfolio in hand. I began by summarizing Christine's condition: stage 2 lymphoma, aggressive, treatment necessary to achieve remission, partial coverage denied, and then laid out the moral imperative: without the full regimen, her prognosis plummets from hopeful to dire. My voice echoed in the hush, and I felt the weight of every eye upon me. As I proceeded through my organized arguments, I watched the board members exchange glances. I presented letters from Christine's oncologist stressing the urgency of each infusion, then testimonial notes from our colleagues about Christine's dedication and kindness. I spoke of her warning not to expect recognition, her fierce independence even in the face of illness, and the injustice of a system that penalized her for refusing special treatment. With each point, I felt conviction grow, as though I were giving voice to Christine's unspoken fears and hopes. Just as I finished my closing remarks, my hand pressed over my chest as if to steady the trembling in my heart. The lead board member cleared her throat. She asked for clarification on one detail: why I, a co-worker, was so invested in Christine's case. I inhaled, steadied myself, and explained how Christine had been my mentor, my friend, and the person who had steadied my career when I faltered. I described how she had refused to offload her burdens yet trusted me enough to hand me responsibility. In her darkest hour, the room fell silent, and I wondered if I had erred by sharing something so personal. Then an unexpected twist. One of the board members pulled out a recent financial report showing that the insurance company had recorded a clerical error in Christine's file. They had approved her full treatment weeks ago but failed to notify us. The room buzzed with murmurs as the board member read the correction aloud. My breath caught in my throat. I glanced down at my prepared notes, then at the folder in my hand, feeling the fight evaporate into confusion. Had all of this been unnecessary? Had Christine already been approved? Before I could collect my thoughts, a message arrived for me. Nurse Dawson was on the line, insisting I return to the hospital immediately. The clerk fetched me to deliver the call, her eyes apologetic. I thanked the board members and gathered my things, leaving the hearing room in a daze. Outside, the counselor from the insurance appeals office congratulated me on a well-presented case, though it seemed the battle had already been won by paperwork, not by my advocacy. I raced back to Mercy General, my mind spinning. In the lobby, Nurse Dawson met me with urgency. She guided me through the same corridors and into Christine's room. The machines by her bed beeped in a calm rhythm. Christine lay with eyes closed, a slight smile on her lips. "The funding's in place," I said, voice thick with relief and lingering frustration. Her eyes flickered open, bright with tears and gratitude. She tried to speak, but Nurse Dawson gently placed a hand on her shoulder, letting her rest. As I sat beside Christine, she squeezed my hand and finally confessed the deeper secret she had kept from me. She'd discovered the insurance error herself but had been too proud or too afraid to tell anyone. She'd insisted I handle her finances, not knowing the truth. Her warning not to expect recognition had been her way of protecting my peace of mind. I realized then that her greatest struggle had been bearing the burden alone, refusing pity. Even as she slipped toward the edge of despair, tears blurred my vision as Christine's hand trembled in mine. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, overwhelmed by everything we had endured together: the hospital corridors, the late night document hunts, the day of the hearing that almost never should have happened. And yet, despite the bureaucratic triumph, the real victory lay in our honesty, in sharing fears, burdens, and the fragile thread of hope that had carried us through. Outside the room, Nurse Dawson arranged for the first chemotherapy session to begin tomorrow morning. She looked at me, her expression soft but firm. "Rest tonight," she whispered. "You both will need it." I nodded, my body finally surrendering to exhaustion. As I settled into the chair beside Christine's bed, I felt the story still unfolding. There were treatments ahead, uncertain outcomes, and emotional obstacles yet to come. But for the first time, we faced them together, unburdened by secrets. The next chapter of Christine's fight and our friendship was just beginning.